All right, so Derrick, tell me about you. Where did you grow up? Since we already tapped into my childhood and
Yeah.
experiences and moving and everything.
I grew up in the great city of Atlanta, Southwest Atlanta. Is kind of born and raised in College Park. Also, moved around a little bit. My dad was in the military, so
Okay,
Florida, Texas, Spain. I did a bunch, but Atlanta is home.
nice. And you're in Atlanta now.
I am. I am in Atlanta now. I've been, around the world and back.
What did living in different, not just cities but countries, like what did that experience do for you as far as like mindset and like understanding kind of like culture?
Honestly, and not just different growing up, going to different cities, but then, you know, I ended up living in different circles, like levels of wealth, levels of education, vastly different at the highest and lowest end. And one thing that made me realize is that people are very similar, or people
Hmm.
are all different, but human nature is the same.
Hmm.
Um, in that you can have the same actions that get different results based off of context. Um, and but that man, but people really are people, and human nature is pretty similar. Even though all these people, even though every individual is an individual. Um,
Yeah.
so it was just great perspective. Also, as a kid, I feel like I can move into any circle and be able to feel like I'm myself, and I can and I belong there. So that was good.
Yeah, yeah. What brought you back to Atlanta?
Well, so a little bit of context as to where I was will help with why I came back. So, after leaving high school, I went to boarding school for a year. Then I went to Harvard University, started a business, did really well. While I was at Harvard, I also played football, and that was really great too. Uh, I worked
I'm
at
sorry,
Goldman.
hold on a second. Hold on a second. Mom, mom, I'm absolutely in the middle of the interview right now. I'm in the middle of the interview right now. Okay. Okay. All right, bye.
Yep, you warned me.
I told you, it's just I love that
um,
woman. Okay.
yeah.
You were saying.
um, what was I saying? Oh, yeah. So after I left Harvard, worked at Goldman Sachs as a bond trader, and I started a real estate business when I was a senior in college. So kept running that, and by we got 2013, that's when I moved to
Mhm.
Atlanta. At 500 units worth of apartment properties, 500 units worth of multifamily down here in Atlanta. I was in New York, working at Goldman Sachs, which is a full time job. Like, and they want every single ounce of your soul. Like, so it's not like I had a bunch of free time.
Yeah.
uh, and then my girlfriend was in Columbus. It was a whole lot. So I was like, I was really at a fork in the road. I had to decide, what do I want to do? And I decided I wanted to come back to Atlanta and rebuild the community in the neighborhood that I grew up in. So this after the financial crisis, there were lots of blighted apartments and all around the city, really, especially where I grew up, in areas that honestly weren't even that bad, but the properties had fallen into disrepair. So I left
Yeah.
Goldman and came back and started buying and renovating and taking gang infested, broke down apartments and making the nicest apartments in the neighborhood. And so that's why I came back. And it's a good place to live and raise a family. And my girlfriend didn't want to move to New York. So there we go.
She's from Columbus?
She is. She's from Cleveland.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. No, not New York. Mm-mm. No. New York takes a desire to be in New York to enjoy being in New York.
Yes, which I had.
Um,
I liked it. She
yeah.
didn't.
No, I absolutely loved my 6 years in New York. It was amazing, but I can understand anyone who's like, absolutely not. Like I get it. Um, you did a lot before coming back to Atlanta. So that's a lot happening. You It's great because it goes to show that, what you hear now as far as like black jobs, you you worked a very eclectic system, but you kind of stayed in the area of wealth management, I guess you can say. Um, how
Risk.
important was yeah, how important was that? Like why was that something that was appealing to you?
I mean, I grew up in Southwest Atlanta, and it's very evident that is a capital constrained place. If all these people with good jobs, to be honest, the income is pretty, decent. But it was a food desert where I grew up.
Yeah.
There was there whole four whole exits on the 285, which is it goes all around the city. You have four whole exits. There's only one grocery store. Like you have all these people. Why is that? Just because there's not enough capital coming into these markets. And I seeing that over and over again in different contexts. Yes, I saw how the flow of capital changed the
Yeah.
way that people live. And I felt like I wanted to, with my background and from my perspective, be in the business and have a career making decisions on how capital should be deployed. And so early on in my like career journey and in my life, that's what I wanted to be doing. And I felt like there's no better place to learn about how to take risk and how to deploy capital than Goldman Sachs. And so that's where I started out.
Nice. Now it's interesting because Atlanta, especially like before COVID, Atlanta was the desirable place to come because housing was so affordable. It was so cheap. You can like get a home for the price that you would have a studio apartment in New York. Everyone was like still flooding down here, which has been going on since 96 Olympics. It's been the hot spot for migration from the black community. What I think we community wise don't fully understand is how to maneuver within real estate. The fact that you were able to tap into the multifamily apartments, and use that as a way to generate income and give people opportunities to have housing. It's interesting because you drive around the city, you see a lot of dilapidated areas. Is it hard to get them to restore them, or is it more of a desire kind of thing
When you say
here
get
in the
that,
city?
here's the thing. So I can talk a little bit about like what it's because yeah, you drive around and they're dilapidated properties. You think it's like that now. Is not. Back in 2013, it was like right after the housing crisis, which by the way, in Atlanta, the bottom was 2012. Prices kept going down in 10, 11, and 12, and that was the bottom. So 2013, it was right at the end of it. There were lots of properties. There were properties in perfectly good neighborhoods that were completely dilapidated and 25% occupied, have a bunch of gangs and roaches and rats, that was what you see.
Yeah.
Part of it is like the people with like there are centers of capital. Capital is something that it works best at scale. So like, it ends up pooling in different places and have this, and the people who deploy capital, they don't know these neighborhoods very well. So it's hard for them to be efficient in, efficiently allocate capital to these places, to black places. There are not a lot of black people who understand, who have the job of looking at these apartments and finding out and figuring out how to create value, and figuring out where you probably aren't going to create value. Because it's really a black box. One thing I learned from, as you pointed out earlier, I moved in a lot of different places and I was in a lot of different circles from a very young age because my dad was in the military. What you learn is that people don't do that often. Like people stay in their own bubble. People stay in their own circle.
Really.
And everything outside of that is completely foreign. And they perceive risk where sometimes there isn't. And that was honestly a hack in my early career. I could be in New York and comfortable in that environment, being able to speak of money and returns and investment, and then come to Atlanta and come into a neighborhood that where I could see the opportunity. I could see like, yeah, this is a great property. It's right across from, Camp Creek Marketplace or something. And there are a lot of people who want to live here, but it's not getting the investment because if you're in New York, you're just looking, it's like, oh, I heard anything south of I-20 is bad, I'm not even going to look at it. Well, that's
Right.
that's a business opportunity that I was able to exploit over and over again and generate higher returns than other people. So you asked the question, is it hard to get them to, to look at that? And really, it's just a matter of bringing the right amount of knowledge and information to connect with capital. And
Yeah.
needs to have more of those connections in order to, get rid of the inefficiencies in the market, which,
Yeah.
blind apartments in, good neighborhoods. That's just inefficient market inefficiency.
So that's pretty much, that's a clear cut answer for the most part. I think the affordability now, it's a one bedroom is going to run you, typically Atlanta, somewhere between 13 and 1500. I ride around with my realtor app open, and I just like click in neighborhoods and see what's there. Those are houses. Like, that's the price of a mortgage. And there's a lot of opportunities and programs that can help people who may not have down payments make or get a down payment, and you stay in your house for like a minimum of like 6 years without transferring anything. Like, there's a lot of that opportunity there. Is it just that people don't know, or is it the home ownership aspect is intimidating to the community?
I mean, there's a little bit of those things going on. What I would say is that when it comes down to it, if you have a more housing, then more people will live in that housing, if that makes sense. And if
Mm-hmm.
you have less
Mm-hmm.
housing, then fewer people will live in the housing. And the way that with the economy that we created, i.e. capitalism, the way that works is if there are fewer housing, fewer people will live in that housing, and those fewer people are going to be the ones with the most money. Like,
Yeah.
you're going to get it. If you have
Yeah.
more housing, then you have more people. That means people with a little bit less money are going to get it. So really, you do have problem. You do have some programs like down payment assistance, and down payment assistance is great. It's not big enough. The programs are not big enough to make the type of impact as just creating more housing. And what you're seeing right now is that, like, there was a big explosion of development in 2001, 2021, 2022, right after the pandemic. And there's a lot of housing. Well, now all that is coming to market. It takes about 2 or 3 years to build an apartment complex. All that's or a big single family development. A lot of that is coming to market, and what you're seeing is rents are going down a little bit, or like, or plateauing. Housing prices are not going up as fast. That's because there's more supply, and that's really way to make the biggest impact in terms of making housing more available. It's just building more of it. It's not that complicated. If you want more people to have housing, you got to build more housing. But there are programs, they're hard to get. If you can get them, then great. It would be helpful. And that's going to be a small part of the solution. And it definitely can be a big part of the solution for a small number of people, but they're just not big enough to have en masse impacts, I don't think.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. So tell me about Nectar. How did this come about? How did you decide to start this company?
Yeah. So, I mean, I spent a dozen years, maybe just a little less than that, about 10 years buying, renovating, selling, asset managing, developing, mostly affordable housing, but also some, I did a couple of hotels and some self-storage and some retail. I did some other stuff. I did about $450 million worth of assets over that time frame. And one thing I realized is no matter how big you get, at first I was like, man, if I just had $50,000, what could I do? And then it was like, well, if I just had $500,000, what could I do? And I got bigger. It's like, well, if I just had $5 million more dollars, like in the real estate business, it's a capital intensive business. No matter how big you get, users are always going to need money to buy your next property or finish a renovation. And that was what was constraining my career, even when I had a portfolio of stabilized properties. So I started Nectar to basically solve that problem, to give people who have a portfolio of cash flowing assets, who have, experience, who are able to go in and, create additional supply in the market, but just have liquidity problems, to give them the cash they need to keep their portfolio growing and improving. And so that's one reason. Another reason is, there is, the way you make the biggest impact, what I want to do is I want to create impact at scale. I want to create more housing to make it more available for my people, for people in general. And what I learned after doing it for 10 years is the best way to do that is provide capital to the people who know how to do it. And so that's what we're doing at Nectar. And on the other side, we allow investors to invest in our fund where they can get, stable, consistent quarterly returns backed by dozens and dozens of properties that are owned by professional real estate entrepreneurs who know what they're doing. So that's
I think it's the amazing cycle of being in Atlanta, going to Harvard, starting a business, getting into real estate, getting into stock options, learning that world, bringing that back into Atlanta, and then generating that wealth balloon in the city while doing something that's beneficial to the community as a whole. Like it's the way it should be. Like that's how you're supposed to maneuver. You figure it out and then you reach back and help a group of people that look familiar or that are familiar because it's home.
And
that's really dope.
And we have a history of doing it, right? I'm not the first one. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. I look up to a lot of people who did that, even in Atlanta. H.J. Russell, for instance, Herman Russell, built thousands and thousands and thousands of units of housing. And back in the 60s, when there were, when there was protests and all this right stuff going on, he would cut some checks to bail people out of jail if they got, if they were protesting, when their children protesting, they were locking up a bunch of children, they were for our history is people scripting and scrapping and building businesses and making it and then building our community. And it just is what it is. And that's the American way. That just is what it is.
No, absolutely. All right, so you start the business, you grow the business, and now you look at the political spectrum and you say, I need to do something to help push some of these things that I feel like are important along. You're looking at the young voter. What do you want the young voter to understand about not just politics in particular, but this political season that we're in right now? Like, what was important that made you say, I need to utilize my voice here?
I think that we have to get back to the reality of things don't change unless we stand up and change them, period. And the bare minimum is showing up to vote on, in a presidential election. That's like the bare minimum. We had people fight and die so that we had that power. And they did that because that power is important. We have that power. That's the bare minimum we should do. However, something that is true and has always been true is that freedom is not free. It's paid for in blood and sacrifice. And usually by someone, fortunately for us, we had our current freedoms today paid for by people who are in generations that came before us. It is our responsibility to take the fight to the current things going on for the next generation so they have freedoms and liberties that we don't currently have. The way that America has worked is we've made 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You had, Emancipation Proclamation, but then you had after that, then after that you had like the Ku Klux Klan and all these things that came and reduced power. And then you had like, you had, Obama, then you had Trump. I mean, you have like things go forward and then go backwards, and that's just how it is. And that will happen. Like, just because we make gains doesn't mean they're here to stay. It takes fighting, and it takes, at a minimum, getting up and vote. But it takes more than that. It takes making your voice heard. It takes having a relationship with your local political leaders and talking to them, showing up. It takes some of y'all and some of us to stand up and say, you know what? I have a different perspective and think that we should do things differently. I'm going to get up and run, or I'm going to be I'm going to have political influence. I'm going to like, just show up at the senator's doorstep until we do this, because this is what should be done in my community. So,
Yeah.
I can keep going, but
No, I think it frustrated me. Maybe about a month and a half ago. I was on social media and it was just like seeing like the slew of people just saying like they weren't going to vote. And I thought about how many people, and especially like my grandmother, told me like stories about like the races and everything she had to deal with growing up in North Carolina. And like they couldn't go vote. Like her mom wasn't allowed to vote. So my grandma voted every time the polls were open. I don't even know if she knows what she was voting for, but if it was open, she was there. And like the last time she voted, I fully remember like her struggling to get out of the house. Like her leg was amputated. She put the leg on. We had to wheel her down steps in the wheelchair, but she was like adamant that we got her there before polls closed. And it was just like that memory came to mind. I'm like, y'all are choosing not to do something that people could not do just because you get that, the lesser of two evils conversation. And in the same breath, I'm like, you don't even know what evil is. Like this is not the evils. Like the evils are a whole lot worse than that. But then I had to understand that for a new generation of voters, people that are just turning 18, the chaos that they see in politics, that they understand politics at this point, is pretty much all they know. Like they don't know what normal looking political procedures are. Like when a house can vote and the Senate votes at like 80 to 20 because they're being realistic about what they want. It's not partisan votes. Right. So it's like this isn't like a partisan thing. It's like people were getting impeached.
Let's look at some historical context. That did happen for a long time. There were some things that were very contested and that were very, very tightly debated and that barely eked through on on not party lines but ideological lines. One thing was the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. When they had all the records for filibustering, that happened when Black people got civil rights, got voting rights. Like these are the things where the last time we had kind of this level of like there were people voting on ideology and it was super close and we almost didn't make it. Those bills, they weren't guaranteed to pass. They passed after literally people died. When there was momentum going for these bills, you know what happened? They started killing Black leaders. MLK, boom. Not just that, they started killing white leaders. JFK. You know what I'm saying? Like there were people who got up and died and that was the level of divisiveness, and it was over identity and over giving people rights. Some of that energy didn't go away. It's here and it's been here and now it's back. And we are getting when did it really get started? Obama. Like when it came back in the face, like, hey, Black people are making gains, and other people generally that are not, historically represented, the historically empowered, are just making strides. Not even dramatic strides. There's still a huge wealth gap, but just getting political power, and that's just something that we're going to have to work through. And the only way to get through it is for us, the coalition that got us the rights in the first place, to actually come together and show our power, that we still have power. It's still most of us, Black people and white people, but we got to show up, both the individuals and the leaders like yourself, Rashad, leading the, people saying that they don't want to vote, they need to be led to vote. And it's on us. It is on us to do. It's our time. It's our generation. It's our time.
Yeah. I've said a lot that there's a lot of groups, and if the groups would work together, you get somewhere. But it's like if you're doing your thing there, this person's doing their thing here, this person's doing their thing over there, and it's like no one really knows what to gravitate towards, and nothing is cohesive. It's like, what are we doing? And it's for people saying like, there's no Black agenda, like there's no there has to be cooperation before you get an agenda, because this person put it out doesn't mean everyone on this side agrees. So it's like there has to be conversations, and it baffles me that hasn't really taken place amongst leadership of some of the major kind of organizations. But then it also made me understand and realize that a lot of things that happened previously wasn't because there was a lot of cooperation between groups. It's because somebody took charge and said, this is what I want to do. Get on or not. Like, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how we're moving forward. And I think it just takes
better. This is what we're going to do, and this is why it's better for us all, and be able to get a bunch of people to get behind them. And sometimes, the reality is it takes some extreme happenings for a bunch of disparate people to come together and agree, and that's unfortunate, but that is what our history has shown us. So hopefully they don't have to get that much worse than they are, but it's happened in the past where it's taken some people getting shot in order for the country to come together to do what's right. If you even look at the World War, like World War I and World War, like, it took the Japanese coming over and bombing us in order for us to actually
get involved.
Absolutely. Something that's extreme. It's unfortunate. It is what it is. But the question is, what do we do? What do you do? What do I do? All of our people do when it's time to step up, because it will be our time.
Yeah. How can people get involved with your movements?
I'd say right now, my goal is to increase the supply of housing. The way to get more people in housing is to have there be more housing. Like, you can do subsidies and all that stuff, but like, if you give more money to somebody to buy if there are 10 houses, you can give like one person who doesn't have a house a little bit more money so they can buy it instead of somebody else. Okay, they already has a house. I don't know. Really, what you want to do is make it not 10 houses, but 20 houses, and then more people can have them. That's what my movement is. That's what I'm devoting my time and my life to today in this season. And the one way you can do that is use Nectar.com, invest in our fund. We are investing in the next generation of housing providers who are on the front lines, building, operating, managing high quality housing throughout this country. So that's what we're doing. There are lots of things out there to do. This is I'm 36, so I can't do it all, but this is what I can spend all my time doing this, and this is what I'm doing: fixing housing, fixing the capital flows.
It's important, man. It's the way to wealth. Yeah. Like, I've learned that real estate is your retirement plan. Like, if you just need to do it right.
Yeah. And if you come to usenectar.com, we have a fund. It pays 12% quarterly. It's backed by dozens, over 100 real estate entrepreneurs that own real property. That's a way to get build wealth. Or if you are building your own portfolio, you have cash flowing assets, you need just $500,000 to close that next deal or to finish a construction project, come through. We can get close in 5 to 7 days and help you get the money you need to be back in the front lines, building and improving your portfolio. Getting the word out. If we can, like, we have investors, not that, like, we're putting a lot of money in a lot of people's pocket. I'd like for it to be some more Black people's pocket, but anyone down for the cause, we'll get in front of them.